Welcome to section 4.2, where we're going to talk about human populations over time. So the study of human populations, at least as far back as we can normally go, which can go back, tens to maybe 100,000 years back. And so we're going to call this idea of studying human populations, where they live, how many people they are, how they use their resources. We call that demography. So this idea of demography is one that we're going to focus on during this chapter. Now, with human population growth, one of the things that we've been able to surmise over the many, many years of study is that through most of human history, and this, once again, we're going back tens to maybe 100,000 years back, we see that the population of humans was relatively stable. So you'd have some years where things were good and the population went up, other years where there could be famine, there could be war, there could be diseases, and it'd drop. So overall, the population size seems to be very stable throughout most of human history. And so by stable, we mean there was probably some in the neighborhood of tens of millions of people, maybe getting up to the point where there's 100, 200 million people, but a relatively small number. We don't normally see large periods of rapid growth. But then around 14 to 1600, so we'll say 1500 for our purposes here, we start to see this exponential growth start. And so what we mean by that is our population keeps doubling. So you can pick a year amount, you can look at it to figure out the exact one, but if we say the population doubles every 80 years, you'd go from 100 million people to 200 million people in 80 years. And then if you go through and you look at it shortly thereafter, so this is 80 years, and then if you give it another 80 years, there would be 400 million. And then you give it another 80 years, and there'd be 800. And so because we keep doubling, the population keeps growing faster and faster, because each time we double, we're adding a larger chunk of the population. We're not just adding 100 million people like we did at the start. Now we're adding 200 million people, 400 million people. So this period of exponential growth has allowed our population to skyrocket to today. It appears to be a little bit over, so if we're doing it, it's greater than 7 billion people. So we are looking at a lot of people that currently are living on this planet, and we've gone from 100, 200 million people back, say, 1400 to now 7 billion people about 600 years later. So this is incredibly rapid growth that we've gone through. Now with the chart here, you can see, and this goes back to usually around 10,000 BCE. The reason for this is the population was very stable, and it really just started to climb a bit around, we'll say 10 to 8,000 BCE, because this is the point that we tend to see agriculture. And so prior to this, it wasn't that humans had necessarily horrible lives, but the carrying capacity of humans was relatively low. To be able to get enough food by just going out and harvesting it meant that we couldn't have a ton of people. But when we started to kind of change the land to suit our needs, it allowed for us to get more food, which allowed for more people. So agriculture is really just the start of this process that allowed us to begin growing. Now, it was very slow at first, but as agriculture got better and better, you can see it starts to climb and climb and climb, especially starting around, say, 2000 BCE, so 4,000 years ago. You see it continue to do this and get better and better as we got better and better at growing crops, raising livestock, and ultimately changing the environment to suit our needs. And you can see at the end here where you've got that J shape, that exponential shape, that you see there, that's this exponential growth that we are currently going through that gets us to around the 7 billion mark right now. Now, I also want you guys to realize that not all continents, not all parts of the earth are equally populated. I know it's easy to look at something and say, oh, 7 billion people, we've got a planet, let's just kind of divvy it up equally. But I want to make sure you understand exactly kind of where population is centered. So when we look at things, the Asian subcontinent is by far the biggest continent that we have in terms of actual size. So if you're looking in terms of square kilometers, it is much bigger than any of the other continents. Africa being in second, you're looking at about 3 million versus 4.5 million. So it's significantly larger. But you'll also see that it has the most people by far. When you look at that Asian continent, you're looking at over 4 billion people. Well over half the world's population is just in that one continent. The next one after that is Africa, which is about 1 billion people. So still much, 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 much less. North America, which we obviously, because we're in North America, tend to kind of focus on thinking that it's like big and amazing. While it's pretty good sized, only has about 500 million of the world's people. Not very much at all. South America is also in the same general ballpark. And then if you look at other ones, Europe certainly has a fair amount, but even Europe is well below 1 billion people. You're talking about 2/3 of a billion people. So it's nowhere near Asia. Even if you combine Europe and North America and all of the other areas, we're still less than Asia alone. So it's important to realize when we talk about demography that a lot of the resources, a lot of the people, a lot of the area has nothing to do with North America. It's going to be over in Asia. And if you combine Europe and Asia, because we have that Eurasian continent, they are technically attached. So if you combine those two, you'll see not only does it have more space, this bumps it up to about 5.5 million square kilometers, but it also adds almost another billion people. So you're talking almost 5 billion people just on that one supercontinent versus the rest of the world. And so it makes you kind of appreciate just how imbalanced some of the population is. Don't feel very crowded here in North America because we're nowhere near as crowded as you are if you live in Asia. Now, one of the reasons we were able to switch from having relatively stable growth, and by stable I mean either we weren't growing or we were growing at a very slow rate. We were going at a very slow pace. One of the things that happened that allowed us to just start to grow like crazy was technology. Technology allowed us to live longer lives because we now have medicine, antibiotics, we have the ability to do surgery, so we can fix things that otherwise would have killed you. But now we can relatively easily fix those things and allow those people to live into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s routinely. And so population growth is not just about having more babies, it's about also making sure that those babies live into adulthood and making sure that those adults die of old age instead of dying of an infection when they stubbed their toe and got a staph infection and died at 20. And so technology will also be tied into things like agriculture because we had things like tractors, we had things like trucks. So we were able to get food to places that we normally couldn't, so we didn't have to worry about famine as much. We were able to farm more land because we had tractors to help us till that land. So technology has been critical not just for the medicinal purposes that we've used it for, because we obviously have lots of stuff that we can use to distribute medicine. We've got the technology that allows us to have, IVs, that allows us to go through and have the, MRIs, CAT scans that can diagnose us. But they've also helped out in other areas like agriculture to really boost our carrying capacity to a much higher level than it ever was before. If you go back 200 years ago, they were having a hard time feeding 1 billion people. But then the Industrial Revolution came along, gave us all this technology, and so now we have enough food that we could probably feed, depending on what you're feeding them, somewhere between, let's say, 6 and 11 billion people.